Okay, everybody, thank you. I think the two gentlemen I have with me represent well how in this young space people wear many hats. I'll introduce first John Wagster. He's an attorney with Frost Brown Todd in their blockchain digital currency group, but today is also representing the Tennessee Blockchain Alliance. And to my far left, Ken Bradberry. After a long time as CTO of healthcare for Xerox, is now with the HCI group, but representing BlockChange today. So a little bit by way of introduction and as how you found yourself here, John, please tell us.
Sure. So it's pretty easy. We're right across the street, Frost Brown Todd, the Nashville office. Overall, we have over 500 lawyers in 10 states. We started up our digital currency and blockchain practice about a year ago with a whopping 2 to 3 clients, and now we have dozens of clients, and we're clamoring to get more. So as the opportunity has arisen, we have expanded our practice. We now have 20 attorneys working on various pieces of the blockchain puzzle, and it's an exciting time to be here.
You guys have planted a great flag in this town, so we're grateful for it. And Ken, same. You're on the stage at Distributed Health. Like, how did you find yourself here?
Well, I'd been involved in innovation for quite a while in healthcare, being part of Xerox, now part of the HCI group, and also starting a new accelerator called BlockChange. So blockchain's been on our radar for quite a while, on my radar especially. But we recognized early the opportunities disruptive opportunities that blockchain can have within the payer and the provider organizations, pharma, life sciences, across the board. So I've been a real advocate of this technology and have been pushing it within our organizations for quite a while. So I'm pleased to have arrived here on this stage.
Well, let's jump in. So this is a panel about state initiatives in blockchain, and I'll start with John. Like, if you want to give us a lay of the land and how you see it, I think you guys are in a pretty good spot to talk about it.
Sure, happy to. So we're all here today because we see the potential of distributed ledger technology. All the investment it can draw, the job creation possibilities, the benefit that those factors can have on states or communities that welcome the technology and make it feel at home. It's a bit of a land grab right now, or a gold rush, pick your analogy. But the one thing we know is in a land grab and a gold rush, the people who benefit are the ones who are there, the ones who show up and get there first and stake a claim. And so our goal in the Tennessee Blockchain Alliance is to stake that claim. Say the state of Tennessee is open for business. There are a number of states that have, there's a growing competition among states for blockchain business. In 9 states so far, as of a couple weeks ago. There might be another one since then, but at least 9 states have established legislation that says we're open for business, that tries to make them blockchain friendly. And the legislation ranges from the very simple things, we recognize what a smart contract is and acknowledge that it can be legally binding, to much more complex tax incentives and dealing with money transmission laws. And states aren't just competing against other states, they're competing against other nations. Many other nations have a distinct advantage over the U.S. because they have the ability to create regulatory frameworks just for blockchain technologies. And think about in the U.S., if you have concerns about whether your cryptocurrency is a security, you go to the SEC. If it's a commodity, you go to the CFTC. If you have issues related to the Bank Secrecy Act, it's federal legislation, but it's enforced by states in 50 different ways. You have money transmitter laws that are governed by the Office of Controller of the Currency and FinCEN, all these different groups. So if you want to set up a cryptocurrency in the U.S., you've got a lot of different boxes to check, and it's really hard to do so. The federal agencies are not coordinating among themselves, and they're not proactive, and they're not reaching out, and they're not doing blockchain-friendly things. Some foreign nations are taking the opposite approach, as I said. Look at Gibraltar, Singapore, to a lesser extent Switzerland. They're establishing their own regulatory frameworks, so that if you go there, it's a one-stop shop. That might be a bit of an overstatement, but that's their goal. You come here, they'll guide you through the regulatory process, they'll help make sure you're in compliance with their laws. They're developing service industries around it and building up banking relationships and business relationships and developer relationships to foster the industry. We want those companies here. We want those relationships here, and we want ICOs to be based here. And our firm's practice is there might be advantages to going overseas, like tax advantages, and if there are, you should take advantage of them. But those advantages are fewer and fewer, and people don't realize that. So now we see them going overseas just to take advantage, because that's what people have done for a while. And we think that's changing. We're seeing it in our practice, and we're seeing it across the industry. Tennessee in general and Nashville in particular are natural hubs for blockchain industry. There's a huge healthcare presence here, of course. There's healthcare IT presence. There's an educated workforce. There's 18 different colleges and universities in town that are capable of training coders. We have the Tennessee Healthcare Alliance and the Nashville Technology Council and groups that are actively interested in promoting the technology. So it's a logical turn for us to be here. Since the beginning of the year, we and Hashed Health and BTC Media started sponsoring a meetup group, which is a social community meetup group. And I think we started with 4 or 6 members.
Yep.
And in less than 8 months, we exceed 400 members now. And that's not only 400 people on the rolls. Every meeting has 200 to 250 people showing up. And now separate meetup groups that are focusing on Ethereum coding and much more specific disciplines are established. And, it says we're ready to do business here. So we formed the Tennessee BlockChain Alliance to take advantage of these synergies and hopefully, ride this momentum that's, that's gotten us here. In addition to what we're seeing at the state level, the Uniform Commission on State Laws, which has representatives of all 50 states that attend their conferences every year, and they meet and break down into the various groups. They are promulgating legislation called the Uniform Laws Commission Model Virtual Currency Act. And it lays out a number of different recommendations that they have considered. A lot of those are ripe for a number of jurisdictions. Ken's going to talk a lot about, I think, what Delaware has done. The 9 states that have enacted legislation are taking bold steps to try and attract the blockchain industry. Delaware is among the best, not surprisingly, because they are a corporate hub, and that's where most corporations set up in the United States. We're not necessarily trying to compete with Delaware. What we're trying to do is lay the foundation for business development and business growth and development within this sector. So technology development more than corporate development. But nevertheless, the Uniform Laws Commission has come out with a number of recommendations about how cryptocurrencies should be treated, how they should be regulated. Because it's very clear, regulation is coming, no doubt about it. We're seeing with a number of rulings by the Securities and Exchange Commission lately referencing the fact that securities laws will be forced on behalf of U.S. investors no matter where in the world they invest. Yeah. And that's a significant occurrence. So states need to be, not even if you don't want to be proactive to try and draw in business and build the community, as I advocate, you need to get active just to protect yourself because that regulation is coming and you don't want to be caught flat-footed. Things like licensing of cryptocurrencies or having mandatory letters of credit or mandatory reserves for certain types of cryptocurrency or mandatory audits and reporting guidelines or governance plans, tracking of cash flows. All those are things that governmental entities are eventually going to do, and I think states should be active in, be active participants in that, or they're going to have their fate determined for them. So that's what the Tennessee Blockchain Alliance is. That's our goal.
So Ken, from the way you see it, a lay of the land from your point of view.
Well, I think it's important that states are progressive in their thinking. Delaware is a great example, kind of the center of the universe when it comes to corporate law and in empowering corporations. That's why I think the number 66% of corporations are incorporated in Delaware. So they're a pretty good blueprint as to how state governments can empower corporations and empower their constituents to take advantage of the emerging technologies and corporations to take advantage of emerging technologies. Illinois is a great example and really have done some tangible things. Tennessee, again, another leader in this space. But really, one of the example that comes to mind, I spent a lot of time working in the telehealth area, telemedicine field. And we had such a challenge with getting states to allow us to operate. Because of the state law, because of the reimbursement challenges, it was very difficult to, in the last few years, to get telehealth moving forward. And I see that as a prime example of where states can truly have an impact on supporting those emerging technologies or not supporting them, and stifling those types of businesses in the competition, but as well as bringing those types of services and capabilities to their state. So I think it's really important. Technologies like blockchain are really going to be disruptive. And if you think about not only internally and how states operate, and Delaware being an example of how they're governing the incorporation of new companies and such, and using blockchain as that trust mechanism, but also just to think in terms of property deeds and licensing, all the things that you would do with the state, and being able to do that in a secure way via blockchain. Tremendous opportunities to become more efficient, to root out the fraud, waste, and abuse, and also streamline and create a lower cost of operating for state governments. So, fantastic, opportunities here for the states that see it, the Delawares, the Tennessees, the Illinois, and a few more. There's still a lot that do not just yet. So we have a ways to go. But I also believe that, states that adopt those emerging technologies and give you the foundation to build companies that can truly take advantage of and be globally competitive, not just, as you said, John, it's not just about here in the U.S. or in the state. It's about being competitive with Dubai and being competitive with UAE and these countries that are doing some really progressive things in blockchain. So it's really going to empower the state in which you're operating in to be competitive within the marketplace. And as these emerging technologies, because blockchain is obviously what we're focused on, but who knows what's coming 5-10 years down the road. And so you want to be able to be equipped for that. And I think having states that see that, and also another challenge that I've been kind of getting feedback on is as political parties, as state governments change, as administrations change, sometimes those priorities change as well. And I felt some of the frustration from some of the folks that are running those programs to say, well, I'm not quite getting the momentum that I once was because, this new administration is in place, or, whatever the case might be, but the agenda changes. So finding a way to stay consistent once you have that mission down and you're focused on changing or adopting the right kind of corporate law, regulations, I think it's incredibly important to have that consistency that transcends any political party or any way that state government might evolve. Those initiatives we have to figure out a way to keep them consistent and keep them on track, regardless of who's running the state at that time.
And I would point out, even as we meet with state and some local government officials, this is new. And blockchain is confusing to those of us who do it every day. And people coming in, particularly from legislative branch, who aren't familiar, they're not tech savvy, and they hear disruption, and they're not really sure what that means.
Right.
And it's kind of hard to describe in many different contexts. So they're wary of jumping on board. They're not just going to jump on and say, yes, we're for that. Yeah, we want job development, but they're not going to say, yeah, we want blockchain, because they don't really know what it means. And I think it's our responsibility as groups, as the community, to tell them what it means and to bring disparate parties in the room, even though we might not agree. There are some among us are libertarians who think nobody should ever touch our blockchain, and nobody should ever be able to identify us. And then there are realists or pragmatists who say if we're going to compete on the global stage, we're going to have to understand that people are going to need to be able to track these, cryptocurrencies. And we need to get those people in the same room to give guidance to the states and the government officials that are trying to make these decisions.
Well, that's a great point. And we talked a lot about the technology, and blockchain technology is really cool. I love it. I mean, I'm an architect by training, and I've been in the trenches in healthcare IT for my whole career. And what I found out very quickly is that if you don't have a clear business case the technology kind of falls flat. So you need to have real business cases. You need to have true understanding of what problems you're trying to solve. And I've had many conversations with hospital CIOs who say, hey, Ken, I know that, that the blockchain is here and we need to, and somehow it's going to impact my health system, or it's going to impact how how I get paid, or how my physicians interact with my patients. And you need to show them real use cases and how you're truly going to move the needle in the right direction for those health systems. Otherwise, I mean, we can lead with the technology, but we have to lead with the business. And part of what BlockChange is all about, and this is an accelerator and really focused on education, both from a graduate level and working on graduate curriculum, as well as capstone projects, but also in executive education. So building a curriculum that teaches both the business and the technical and brings us together in a way that can be truly disruptive. Because the technology by itself, I mean, if you've read on it, it's off the shelf. I mean, it's the beauty of blockchain, is that it is, in fact, technology we use every day. It's put together in a way that is truly transformational and innovative. But without the business and the use cases, you're not going to disrupt with the potential that blockchain truly has.
John, as this regulation matures, how do you see? Are states going to be the ones taking the lead, or are we going to be falling in behind federal regulation? And who do you see taking the lead, and how do you see the interplay between the state and the federal regulation?
So I wish I knew. We'd love to see the federal government taking a lead, and I say that with hesitation because that doesn't always end well. But if the federal government at least put out some parameters. And by taking a lead, it doesn't mean you establish a policy necessarily and say, this is what we're going to do. It means you show leadership by accepting diverse opinions, forming groups to study and make recommendations, and then have those recommendations considered in an open forum where everybody gets an opportunity to comment. We have seen, in the current environment, there's not much regulatory authority being exercised anywhere for anything, even existing regulations. So I think it's naive to think that that's going to start all of a sudden in this space. So I'd say leadership is more prone to start at the state level. And again, it's not, some states are already out front, but for example, defining what money transmitter laws means in your state and what subjects a particular cryptocurrency to money transmitter laws. There are good open ideas and for discussion on that. And states need to have them, because if they don't have them, then it's going to end up, there's going to be a nightmare scenario where some ICO, some nefarious ICO, raises a lot of money and raises money from widows and orphans and goes bust, and turns out it's a pump and dump scam. Yep. And it's going to give all ICOs a bad name, and it's going to be too late for us to get out in front of it and say, wait a minute, we need to do a little self-regulation here. We need the industry to step forward and define our own standards, what we think is appropriate, and start advocating those to states. So when the bad apples come, and they will come, we're ready for them. And we take the sting out of it by a little bit, saying, yes, we told you this was going to happen, but here's how you can prevent it. So I think that's a long answer to a relatively simple question. I think states will and should act first, and some of them are.
And some of them are, I think. Ken, I don't know if you've got more to add to that, but...
I think it's important. And again, when we're talking about enterprise blockchain, and I think part of the education is that it's not a Bitcoin, it's not the open source blockchain that we're really talking about here. And where you need to evolve and become more enterprise focused, because in order to become a trusted part of any infrastructure, but especially within healthcare, and there's some key design requirements that need to be there. You need to be able to manage it, monitor it. You need to be able to ensure that it's secure. You need to be able to understand, how to properly design. And then, of course, it's only as good as the code built around it. So the standards that need to be in place truly need to have guidelines. And again, that's how you're going to ensure that bad actors, that not only from a security or a cybersecurity perspective, but also from a poorly designed applications. And it's really critical that there are, I wouldn't say regulations, because that would be, I think, a little challenging, but I think there needs to be industry standards that are followed that align with guidelines to do business, say, with the state or the federal government, to ensure that you're not creating something that's going to ultimately fail or have a negative impact on blockchain in general, because we all know what could happen there is no one will use it, or it will no longer be adopted. So great companies like Hash Health and Change Healthcare and PocketDoc are doing tremendous work in those spaces, and it's the code and it's the quality of the service that you provide. So
I think you make a good point. I keep using the term regulation, and I'm not sure we really want regulation. What we want more than anything is education. We want. I'm intrigued that your company is actually setting up curricula, for people to study about, because it's regulators and legislators do not understand the technology. And,
exactly.
I'm challenged by the technology. I'm a layperson. I'm not a technologist. I work with it every day, but it's complicated stuff. And to expect lay people, government officials, whoever, to be able to come in and just grasp the disruptive change that distributed ledger technology is capable of is unrealistic. So we've got to raise the bar, and we have to take steps to help educate them, along with any other regulatory or legislative steps we take.
Yeah, and I think part of that falls on us. The Chamber of Digital Commerce has done a really good job in Washington. There's a recent Congressional Day of Education where many people who are here today spent the day on the Hill in support of the Congressional Blockchain Caucus, and sort of went office to office and talked to staffers and members of Congress about, this is what's happening in your district. There's expertise and action in your district that you need to be aware of. And as you guys start to define this and start to think about this, and hopefully not react to the widows and orphans pump and dump ICO, know that you don't need to do this in a vacuum. So I think, hopefully with the Tennessee Blockchain Alliance, we can do similar things on the Hill here and in other states to just sort of, again, not regulate, but maybe define what some of these things are. So, John, you mentioned that you've sort of seen the momentum swing in the last few months. Talk a little bit about how that sort of gravity towards, particularly the work your firm's done, but Tennessee as well, just that sort of inflow of inquiry and that conversion from inquiry to...
Yeah, Giles and I were talking backstage about where there seems to have been some tipping point, and we're not sure exactly what caused it, but in the last 3 to 4 weeks, the informational calls that service providers tend to get that are really just kind of, fishing and trying to learn as much as they can without paying anything, all of a sudden the conversion rates are a lot bigger, a lot better. And people are really buying into the technology. I think it's a combination of things. I think in the cryptocurrency space, you cannot ignore 30 and 40x returns. And the fact that ICOs are going to raise as much or more money this year than venture capital just cannot be ignored by true institutional investors. So I think they're starting to look. And as they are starting to look, the quality of the businesses that are considering implementing the blockchain ideas that they've been kicking around for a while are really starting to improve. Not that we don't have some fantastic companies already that have done ICOs, but I think the bar is moving, and it's incumbent upon all of us to make sure that our service levels rise with it, because as the work picks up, there are challenges to go with that, and the opportunity for failure is also picks up. And we need to be wary of it and prepared for it.
Yeah, the first stories we have in this space cannot be of the failures. They've got to be managed successes. So Just to change track slightly, Ken, if you talk about the education platform that you guys are rolling out and how people are participating in it and what it offers and where it goes, like, John mentioned, so we've got 19 universities in town that, I'll give props to Lipscomb University locally, who's been very forward-thinking and very engaged in this healthcare blockchain conversation. And, it's been remarkable to see how fast they've been able to move and how engaged their sort of graduate students and faculty have been. How is your program sort of rolling out, and how do people sort of participate and inquire?
Well, we're relatively new, but we are talking directly with University of Delaware and the Horn Center for Entrepreneurship. So we're working with their team and some curriculum providers that we've been interviewing and demoing to find not only technical curriculum, but operational and business curriculum that can truly define and help both students and seasoned professionals on how to apply blockchain technologies. Also, talking with other universities like Duke and University of Rochester and others that are interested and have strong master's programs in automation and analytics and comparable types of disciplines. So, we're really looking for the best curriculum and tools, both online and classroom, as well as working with companies who are interested in participating and demoing their solutions and working it into how blockchain can truly be utilized with both healthcare and in other industries. It's really pan-industry with a focus on healthcare. And of course, fintech has gotten all the attention with blockchain, but there's just so many tremendous opportunities in healthcare to do all those things that we've been trying for decades, in the HIE space and interoperability and the challenges that we've had with connecting patients and providers and payers in a way that is truly meaningful. So there's some amazing work that's being done out there that can be translated into educational opportunities. And so we're in the quest to find them and bring them to students and to seasoned professionals alike.
Very cool. Well, we're opening up to questions in a second here. I know that I sort of lost track of how many states are represented here and how many countries are represented here, but it's a remarkable number, and props to the BTC crew for pulling people from such a wide geography. But as you look at the sort of some of the big players, the changes in the Aetnas with wide geographic footprints, and then a lot of the startups that are like in one place or seeking a friendly place to set up shop. I think this regulatory environment is going to be it's a major part of the decision process, and I think that people are starting to pay attention to it. So, just before we open it up, anything else to add, and then we can.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting juxtaposition. People in this room, particularly who come to this conference, are really sophisticated and we understand the space, yet we don't know the answers to the simple questions like, what does your business in Nashville, Tennessee right now need to be successful? What's holding you back? Is it a lack of coders? Is it a lack of architects? Is it a lack of managers? They're really simple things that we don't have a centralized group to have a conversation about. And that's the purpose of the Tennessee Blockchain Alliance. We want to address that need. We have meetup groups, which are fantastic. Hashed Health is taking on the healthcare sector, which is great. But there's a number of, blockchain transcends a number of sectors, and we'd like to have a unified informational spot where people can come, share information, trade notes, and take steps to try and get our state more interested. The fact that other states are doing this successfully just ought to light the fire under us even more, because there's no reason with this maker mentality we have here in Tennessee that we're not really stepping up, showing our creative class and leading the nation on this.
I agree. Can we?
And this is our TCP/IP moment, as I've heard it called. This is the next generation of internet and interoperability, and the internet of trust, the internet of value, and however you want to coin it. And so understanding it is critical. I don't know if it was easier back when we were learning TCP/IP. I remember that because I remember getting my box in the mail from IBM, and it was my plug-in for Windows, if I remember correctly. And so digging in and learning that, I think that was actually easier than blockchain is going to be. Blockchain, you have to live in this foundation, this architecture that we're in, this infrastructure that we're in. And in order for it to be successful, a lot of things have to line up. Like we're talking about states and corporate law and regulations and all those things that are just table stakes to do business. And then obviously now you have to apply these technologies in a way that are going to make real changes and take full advantage of the promise of blockchain technologies. So I believe that our key is training and education. If we have a knowledgeable workforce, if we have a focused workforce that where our designers and all our coders and our architects and all our leaders within those groups truly understand how to build on this foundation, then we can fully realize where blockchain can take us, which is trust relationships. And with no central authority, we're able to obviously build something that that can take all the heavy lifting and all of this latency out of processes that can reduce cost and do all the great things that we've been talking about all day and that have been demoed by these tremendous coders and the hackathoners and the great businesses that have been presenting today. So, but education is the key here, and at all levels, and understanding how to make that happen.
Well, let's open it up. We've got a wide constituency represented here, so Bryce has got a microphone, so if you'd, we've got a question in the middle back there, but
Thanks. Hi, my name's Dr. Matt Rose. I'm the CEO of Sava, a startup company that evolved out of a hackathon at this event last year. I wanted to understand a little bit better from the state initiative perspective. I understand from a national perspective or a federal perspective that blockchain, there is a big focus with the NIST and a few other workshops that are going on. But from the local state perspectives, it's not necessarily talked about as much as a national things. And so I'm curious to understand what the environment is from your experience in that aspect, and if they're maybe waiting for the national perspective to take the lead versus the state. What's the playing field at the moment from your understanding?
So I think waiting on the federal government to take the lead is waiting for Godot, because it's not going to happen in this administration. If we do that, then the government's going to lead by reaction, and it's going to be some bad event that causes them to take action, and it's not necessarily going to be the action we want. There are a number of things that states can do. For example, recognizing a smart contract as a viable and binding legal contract. A smart contract being one that is enacted within the blockchain autonomously when two events occur. Contract automatically forms and executes. Some states have taken that step. It's relatively simple, but it says, hey, we as a state are open for business. States could open blockchain centers and hub of commerce, like Nashville, for example, that are dedicated to providing resources or guidance or networking opportunities to new and existing blockchain companies. They could, and some of these ideas have been enacted or considered by other states. They could appoint a full-time blockchain ombudsman to engage in industry outreach and propose legislative initiatives or work with within our existing framework or entities like ours to find consensus among the players in town. States can provide tax incentives or utility credits for blockchain-based businesses. A business that brings jobs to the state generally has enough leverage and collateral to negotiate those incentives. And since blockchain businesses use a lot of energy, maybe they should merit. So some do. Mining, for example, use a lot of energy. They might merit tax or utility credits for that. Some blockchain business may be exempt from taxation. Or state governments could say, for example, that local governments do not have the authority to tax blockchain businesses, that it's going to be exclusively governed by state law. So things like this, ranging from the small to the large. I already mentioned money transmitter laws, which is a big issue. The state of New Hampshire recently said that any cryptocurrency exchange is exempt from money transmitter laws unless it's tied in also with fiat currency. A step like that would go a long way toward attracting ICOs that might consider going elsewhere, particularly overseas, encouraging them to stay here. It's one less hurdle that they have to worry about.
I think some of the value of something like the Tennessee Blockchain Alliance is just, as new as this space is, we've got advocates, particularly in Nashville and the mayor's office and at the state level, saying, like, what's the ask? Like, you're in this, you tell us. And so it's, as a community, being able to have a collective answer to that that's not, that's sort of thought through, because I think here and in other states, there's willingness and appetite to do something, but the legislators want to do things thoughtfully and don't want to get caught short on the things that they do enact. So,
and many of the proposals they consider, though, don't really require action. They require thought.
Yeah.
Like establishing a regulatory sandbox that puts out guidelines that people can participate in and would benefit local entrepreneurs who can't afford to do that on their own, and create a hub of activity. And around that, service providers like my firm and Hash Health would rise up to give assistance as appropriate, like they do at the Nashville Entrepreneur Center or places like that. So it's not necessarily a guiding role, it's an information role.
so.
Yeah, it's also interesting. I mean, there's actually two different tracks here, maybe a few different tracks, because there's the states that are adopting blockchain internally, that they're going to transform their processes with blockchain, which means how they interact with their, the DMV, how they manage property, how they do all the things that state governments do. Delaware, and Illinois, and Tennessee, and others are kind of eating their own dog food, so to speak, and that they're adopting those blockchain technologies to manage their state and to gain the efficiencies of that. And then there's the enablement of corporations and startups and new entrepreneurship in the blockchain space. So I think obviously the states that are adopting blockchain are probably more apt to have progressive laws and capabilities and regulations that support those startups and those entrepreneurial activities. The states that maybe are not doing that might be the ones that are a little bit behind in adopting new laws and empowering their state's startup and their economic activity or economic growth in those spaces with blockchain and any emerging technology. So I think that's, to me, the litmus test is, are you planning to use blockchain in the delivery of services within your own state government? And if you are, chances are you're headed in the right direction with empowering entrepreneurship.
And even if you're not prepared to take that step, you can certainly take the step of considering it.
Yeah, exactly.
Consider the low-hanging fruit, like using blockchain applications for land recording, or using blockchain applications for state business record keeping. like Delaware has done. They're very simple things, but in the process of implementing those things and learning about them, state governments and legislatures will become educated, and then when you get to the more challenging questions, they're more prepared to deal with them.
Great point.
So let's turn it back out. Do we have any more questions from the audience? Got bright lights.
Do you see a lever in terms of regulating blockchain transactions between peers, such as a Bitcoin transaction? How would the federal government or any entity regulate that?
So it's a great question. You hear it talked about, and I don't know the answer. I have my own thoughts, but I would defer to the collective wisdom of a group of blockchain professionals who get together and discuss it. And so again, that's the point of the Alliance and groups like this, is to have those type of conversations. Just to address your question more head on, that's really tough. And governments fear a loss of control and a loss of an inability to track transactions. And as soon as you step into any regulatory framework, your question is the next logical one. Okay, the government is doing this. Now what happens to private transactions?
Yeah, that's interesting because the whole, concept here is that they can't. So when you build in an enterprise blockchain, now you're adding those features and functions. So it becomes a function of the application which you're using. So will there be an approved application or code base that if you're going to do business with the government or anything controlled like that, are there standards or regulations that are going to evolve and create those types of traps, so to speak, or whatever you call them? I think that remains to be seen. Again, the blockchain is only as good as the code built around it. So, and not to say that code will be friendly code if you're looking to avoid, being monitored by the government. I mean, I'm thinking that it will probably be a feature or a switch that gets thrown for the applications that interact with that particular government agency between whatever peer-to-peer type of transaction that you're doing.
We've all seen the actions taken in the last few weeks by the Chinese government, where they first banned the use of cryptocurrencies, and then they banned cryptocurrency exchanges altogether. They mandated refunds for some ICOs that had taken place, and that's the ultimate ban. And we don't want to see something like that in the U.S. government. Not that it ever could happen in the U.S. government like that, but I think a lot of people that I've talked to working in the international sphere believe the Chinese government isn't going to ban cryptocurrencies forever. They just want to get their arms around it. So what?
Isn't it true that SEC regulation and Chinese regulation is that they're appointed under equity, the same regulations that equities are under, like stocks, bonds, and so forth, because they're regulating the people who transact the Bitcoin. But I don't see how anybody can stop to people from exchanging keys. I don't see how the Chinese government can understand that, because you're sending somebody a key, which is the transaction.
Well, I think there's a difference between banning it and making it illegal. What they've done is making it illegal, and whether they can stop it is a different question.
Yeah. And it really also depends on what you're transacting. I mean, if you're operating within a healthcare framework and you want to get healthcare and you want all your records, your longitudinal health record that is on blockchain, and it's gonna result in a higher level of care, a quality of care, because they have all this information. I want to be on that blockchain. If it's something outside of that, then anything, either a unique or non-unique asset that you tokenize, I suppose you can, depending on what it is you're trying to do. Right now, in open source Bitcoin world, you can send money to anyone, and you're anonymous, and you have everything that comes with that. But in the enterprise world with blockchain, I think it's going to be very focused on the services that you're looking to gain or receive.
But it's not a unique Bitcoin problem. You can transfer cash with Venmo as well, and there's no government efforts to restrict that. So I think once we get comfortable with the blockchain framework generally, we're going to get a lot more comfortable with person-to-person transfers and things like that, which would be extremely difficult, if not impossible, to regulate anyway.
Yeah, and remember, we want to truly disrupt in a positive way processes, which means that how we deploy blockchain architecture needs to take that process and streamline it. And so I think in its pure form, you're able to do that if you have the intention to truly improve a process. Otherwise, I don't think you're not going to get the same quality or the promise of blockchain, which you're just not going to achieve that because you won't have the right focus and you're not solving problems, you're really creating them.
Okay.
Yeah, this is for Ken Bradberry, I think, though the others may want to comment too. We have a lot of resources centered on blockchain here now, but we've also kind of drawn back in Nashville from healthcare IT acceleration a little bit for true seed companies. And Ken, what I'm wondering is whether you have given thought to replicating the BlockChange accelerator program here in Nashville.
Most definitely. We started in Delaware for obvious reasons that we stated earlier, but I see this as an organization that could assist and be very successful in every state. A model like it. I mean, it's really it's based upon bringing the best educational resources, the best mindset around enabling blockchain technology. So I think it would be tremendously successful in Tennessee.
I asked Ken that same question before we came on, too, so we're pulling for him.
Yeah.
So my question is, as a taxpayer, state of Tennessee, and actually I should preface that with, I don't pay any state income tax in the state of Tennessee. Right? Yeah, exactly. And so I think, and so this is the disconnect, which is as a state initiatives, Illinois, actually with this whole partnership with Hash Health, this blockchain initiative, did this pilot, but actually Illinois doesn't have any money. And so state of Tennessee is much more conservative in our budgetary guidelines, and everything is really sort of outsourced to a vendor. So I think my question really is, how do we get over that barrier to adoption at the state level to, yes, try out these pilots, but do it in a cost-effective manner that actually it's efficient?
I don't think any of us have the answer to spending and state government issues. Having said that, I think there are a lot of things the state can do that don't cost a lot of money. And many of the initiatives that have been forwarded by the Uniform Laws Commission, for example, are self-funding. And people in the industry don't want to hear, well, we're going to have to pay a surcharge or a registration fee to pay for the state to do an investigation on us. But that type of regulation has taken place in some states, and that's a possibility. But more than that, it's the informational piece that I think we can move forward with. The state is constantly, or should constantly be looking at ways to improve their own operations, and it's not that big an ask to ask that they consider blockchain-based initiatives for low-hanging fruit, like we mentioned earlier. And as we're doing that, what we're going to do is educate the state and local governments and legislators in this whole process. The thing that we're so passionate about in this room, a lot of people haven't even heard of, or if they've heard of it, they have very little understanding of it, and we need to raise that bar. Because if we don't, it's going to be forced down on us in some way that we don't like.
Yeah, interesting question. And the first thing that came to mind is, building some kind of reference architecture that all states can adopt. How do you create efficiencies? How do you build something that's repeatable? They all kind of operate the same way. I mean, it might use different apps and policies, procedures, and some, laws are more archaic than others, but for the most part, they all pretty much do the same thing. I mean, a state architecture that you could lay down on top of any state and bring basic blockchain services to the table. The possibility of reducing the cost of the entry cost into blockchain. So there's a lot of great minds thinking about that sort of thing, and I'd love to hear more. That was the first, when you brought that up, the first thing that came to mind, reference architecture. It's something that a template I can lay down on top of any state and do these basic services in blockchain and do it very efficiently.
I'll conclude quickly. I know we're out of time here, but as I think what states can do well is they can signal that we're open and signal that we're going to make thoughtful, as we regulate, we're going to do it thoughtfully and we're going to do it with input from the community. I think as an advocate for blockchain and as an advocate for what blockchain is going to enable, I'm looking forward to the point where blockchain is not a part of the conversation. It's going to be the things that are possible because blockchain is in the background. And to steal my colleague Corey Tadaro's phrase, I'm excited about blockchain fading to ubiquity. It's going to be when the people with the knowledge in this room read an article and sort of can raise an eyebrow and say, I know that could only be possible because it was a blockchain, but the word blockchain is not mentioned in the article. Then we're in a place where, John, the states can adopt these applications because they're better than what was out there before. And I don't think it's a matter of funding those things. I think it's a matter of taking advantage of the savings and the better way of doing it that blockchain will allow for. So, sorry to take the last word there, but to thank John and to thank Ken for their expertise and insight, and to thank BTC Media for the forum. So, thank you all.